Good morning. Lovely to see you. Before I was a minister, I worked for a long time as a computer programmer. And for a while, I had a particularly enjoyable job where I was writing software that didn't just run on computers, but controlled big, hairy machines in big, hairy factories. So I particularly worked in the textiles industry and wrote software that made textiles machines work. And the kind of machine that my company produced was the kind of machine that would make the colours right for dyeing and printing of textiles. And so we had machines that were basically a big long conveyor belt, except it wasn't a belt, it was metal rollers that would turn, but a big long conveyor that would take a 50-gallon oil drum. Are you familiar with what a 50-gallon oil drum looks like? And as it went through the machine, it would be filled up with stuff that was kind of the consistency of custard, but really, really bright coloured. And then that would go into, that drum would be taken into a printing machine, and it would print, if you've got a printed top on, that's the sort of thing that we made. And in one particular factory in America, I was working for a number of months, installing and configuring and getting the software right for this machine. And the way the machine worked was when the 50-gallon drum got to the end of the machine, it was probably on a roller about this high off the ground, and then the rollers continued down a slope. We called it a gravity conveyor. And most of the rollers on that slope, you could spin them and they'd spin round. Every fifth roller, I'm telling you this because it's important, stay with me. Every fifth roller, we tightened up really tight. So if you tried to spin it, it was really hard to turn. And what that meant was that a 50-gallon drum full of this brightly coloured sludge would slowly progress down this slope until it got to floor level. And that, as far as we were concerned, was the machine working right. Now, in that particular plant, there was an engineer. And the engineer had two distinguishing features. The first was that he was the son of the managing director of the entire plant. The second was that he was an idiot. But when you're the son of the managing director, that doesn't seem to be a barrier to getting a responsible job. And he came to us and said, "Can we make the gravity conveyor faster?" And we said, "No, we cannot. That would be a bad idea." And we had a bit of an argument about this, but he came in overnight with his spanner, and without our knowledge, he loosened all the nuts on the tight rollers on the gravity conveyor. And the next morning we came in, and the machine beautifully, under the perfect control of the software, which was so well written, produced a 50-gallon drum of highly coloured sludge, which reached the end of the machine and the beginning of the gravity conveyor. It did not trundle down slowly. It shot down the gravity conveyor like it had been fired out of a gun, reached the stop at the end, but it did not stop at the stop at the end. It just turned from vertical to horizontal and continued. 50 gallons of highly coloured sludge makes a huge mess. Trust me on this. Our machine, there's a point to this, our machine was made up of thousands of components, each one significant, each one with a job to do. It only took one component not doing its job to turn a smoothly working machine into a messy disaster. It only took one component not doing its job the way it should have been doing it to make that machine not work at all. Which is pretty much the way Paul in the New Testament describes the church working together. I want to read you a passage, and it's a passage you know really well. I'm going to break my own personal rule. I normally only read from the NIV, because that's the Bible that we've got here in the building, and I normally don't ever read from the Message. because of my own personal opinions about it. But on this occasion, I think the message has this passage so beautifully that I'm going to read from the message. And if you want to follow in the NIV Bibles, do please grab one from the back. I'm going to read to you from 1 Corinthians 12, a passage you know probably very well, which describes the church as being like a body with all the parts working together. Ideally, all the parts working together and taking their place. So 1 Corinthians 12, reading from verse 14, but I'm going to read to you from the message. I want you to think about how all this makes you more significant, not less. A body isn't just a single part blown up into something huge. It's all the different but similar parts arranged and functioning together. If foot said, I'm not elegant like hand, embellished with rings, I guess I don't belong to the body. Would that make it so? If ear said, I'm not beautiful like the eye, limpid and expressive, I don't deserve a place on the head, would you want to remove it from the body? If the body was all eye, how could it hear? If it was all ear, how could it smell? As it is, we see that God has carefully placed each part of the body right where he wanted it. But I also want you to think about how this keeps your significance from getting blown up into self-importance. For no matter how significant you are, it's only because of what you're part of. An enormous eye or a gigantic hand wouldn't be a body, but a monster. What we have is one body with many parts, each its proper size and in its proper place. No part is important on its own. Can you imagine eye telling hand, get lost, I don't need you? Or head telling foot, you're fired, your job's been phased out? As a matter of fact, in practice it works the other way. The lower the part, the more basic, and therefore necessary. Now, probably that passage is very familiar to you, but it's powerful, isn't it? It's powerful, and I particularly like the way the message retells that. But here's the bottom line of what Paul was writing there in 1 Corinthians. Church is God's idea, and he didn't design it to have a small number of experts doing everything while everyone else watches. That is not God's design for church. He intended church to be a living organism with every single one of us having a valuable part to play within that, what's described here as a body. And that means that there's a role, or maybe roles, plural, within TBC that only you can play. And God gives us the gifts to enable us to play those roles, and nobody else can do them. And the nature of them may change as we go through life, as we go through different stages in life. The roles that he asks us to get involved with may well change. But the question is, how can I work out what roles God is currently encouraging me to take and what gifts he's given me to do that? And I don't want to talk for too long this morning because we do want to give plenty of time at the end to look at the boards and to spend time thinking and praying about that. And I want to be quite practical, but I want as well to share one or two stories from my own journey, which I hope might be helpful as we think practically about how we work out what our gifts are, what God's calling us to, and where it might be that he wants us to serve in church. And the first thing I want to say to you is this: please don't put limits on what gifts God might give you. Please don't put limits on what gifts God might give you. Your gifts are far more about God than they are about you. If you're a Christian, you've got supernatural gifts that God's giving you, and you've also got natural gifts. You've got social skills and musical gifts and organizational ability and artistic creativity and academic abilities and sporting talents and all sorts of other things. And we've all got different ones in different measures. And you may have learnt some of those natural gifts and talents, or you might feel like you were born with them. But either way, those are also something that God has given you, along with any supernatural gifts that he's given you. And he will use them. He'll use the gifts that he's given you. But he might also want to give you some new gift that he's never given you before. If you'd known me when I was 20 years old, you would have known for absolute certain that there was no way on earth that I would ever do a job that involved public speaking. If you'd known me, you'd have been I was certain of that, and if you'd known me at all, you'd have been certain of that. When I was at university, I was given a piece of paper and asked to read it as a notice in a meeting. That meeting would probably have been half the size of this church service, and I was physically terrified. It's hard to describe to you how scared I was. By the time I got to stand up, I just had to stand up in my seat where I was and read 2 or 3 sentences off this piece of paper. I could feel my heart racing, and I was sweating profusely and shaking to the point that I didn't think I was going to be able to actually stand up without sitting down again. And I stood there really thinking that I was going to be sick or wet myself in front of all these people. I couldn't get the words out. I was so scared. I'm not making this up. This is the absolute truth. And I was, after that experience, well, before that experience as well, I was more than happy to never, ever speak in public again. It just was not me. When I finished university, which would have been a year or 2 years after that, I went to work for my church in Manchester to do a gap year, sort of an internship there. And I was expecting to help out in youth groups, maybe go and knock on doors and give leaflets out. We used to do that sort of thing back in the 1990s. But I expected to be doing behind-the-scenes stuff. The very first week I was there, the senior minister said to me, "You're preaching next Sunday." And I was terrified, beyond terrified. But at the same time, there was something inside me that went, "Oh yeah, I'd quite like to do that." And I didn't want to do it, but I did want to do it as well. And when it came to the Sunday, it really wasn't a great sermon. And I absolutely was terrified, but part of me really enjoyed that opportunity. And God started to birth something in me that I would never have volunteered for, never have put myself forward for, never have seen as a possibility for me. God started to birth something in me that Sunday. Don't put limits on what God can do in you. Be open to the possibility that God might surprise you. I'm not saying that every single one of us is going to be a preacher next week. That's not how God works. But he may birth something in you that is a long way away from what you expect. Don't put limits on him. So it's fine to say such and such a role in church just doesn't appeal to me. That's fine, you can say that. But to say I could never, the only limits to what God can do through you are the limits that you place on God. Because God is remarkably unconcerned by what you think his limitations are. The second thing I want to say, as I say, I want to be very practical this morning. The second thing I want to say is this: give it a go. Give it a go. If you're interested in something, if you even vaguely think you might want to do something or might have a calling to do something, give it a go. On that very first occasion where I preached my first sermon, I had a brilliant senior minister, really, really encouraging guy. And just before I preached, he said this to me. I may have told you this before. He said, "I want you to know, even if it goes badly, I'm going to give you another go." My word, that took the pressure off. That took the pressure off. Because church is a place where we can make mistakes, isn't it? Because we're family. If there's something that you think, I wonder, maybe I could give that a go. Give it a go. What's the worst that could happen? If it goes wrong, pick yourself up, dust yourself off and give it another go. If it goes wrong 2 or 3 times, then maybe God's calling you to something else, but give it a go. Do you think that you might have what it takes to lead a study in your small group? Well, chat to your group leader. Give it a go. Are you wondering whether you might have the skills to operate all that technical equipment up there on the balcony? Have a chat with the guys up there. Sometimes giving it a go means going and watching somebody else doing it first. So giving it a go doesn't mean they're going to say, right, it's all yours, off you go. But go and sit and shadow them. Watch what they do. See what they do. And then give a bit of it a go. As a church, we currently only have 2 people who lead musical worship. And I am convinced that there are other people that God is equipping to do so. Absolutely convinced of it. Because I don't believe that God's plan for this church is to have only Si and I leading worship at the moment. That's not what he's got for us. And it might be you. And it might be that your heart just started to beat faster because you're wondering whether it could be you. And you'll only know if you give it a go. And when you give it a go, the first time you do it, it probably won't be brilliant. Give it a go. First time I led worship, it was horrific. I think I've told that story. I'm not going to tell it again this morning. But give it a go. Find it. So that's probably not the right way to encourage you to give it a go. First time I led worship, it was really encouraging. Give it a go. This is what happens when I leave my notes behind. So, first 2 things. Don't limit what God can do in you and give it a go. Try something out. Try something out. The next thing I want to say is to think about what it is that God has made you passionate about. And I don't mean, I'm passionate about saints or something like that. I mean, what has God put inside you that is a reflection of some part of his heart? Because I think for each of us, there are things in church that we get excited about. There are things in church that we get passionate about that are a reflection of the things that God gets passionate about. And sometimes that's a really good pointer to where he might want us to use our gifts. Just very recently, we had to make a difficult decision to close Messy Church for a while, which is not particularly what we wanted to do, but it's what we felt was the right thing to do. And we were looking really hard at BFG and whether we were going to be able to continue with BFG or not, and whether it was going to be viable or not. And at that point, a few people stepped forward and said, no, this can't close, it's too important. And those people have stepped up, and that is a God-given passion. That's something that God has placed inside those people. And that steers us as to where we use the gifts that he's given us. Let me try and explain that a bit more. God might have given you a gift of hospitality. Now, that's a gift that's to do with making people feel welcome, making people feel at home. It's not just about making cups of tea. That can be part of it, but it's a bigger thing than that. It's to do with making people feel like they belong here and feel comfortable and feel at home here. Now, that's a gift. If your passion is to do with the church family and to do with pastoral care, maybe even to do with worship, then you could easily use that gift of hospitality by joining our welcome team, welcoming people here on a Sunday for services. But if you've got a passion for our community or for evangelism and outreach, you could take the same gift and use it by joining our cafe team. Welcoming in the same way, but welcoming people to a different activity, a different part of what's going on within TBC. It's the same gift, used in a different place. But if your passion was for seeing young people thrive and become all that they can be under God's hand, then you might use exactly the same gift helping out on the youthy team on a Friday night. Same gift, but very, very different places of using it, and that's dictated a bit by the passion that God's put inside you. Do you get the idea? You get what I'm saying? You're still awake. 2/3 of you, that's good. There was a guy who was in my youth group in Manchester many, many years ago, and as he grew up and left the youth group, he clearly had a very specific gift. He had a natural gift for being a salesman. He could sell fridges to Eskimos, this guy. He was always going to make money selling stuff. And he went off to Spain,
And he made a big pile of money selling finance to expat Brits living over in Spain. But what he found was that that didn't satisfy him, even though he was getting quite wealthy for a young man, because God had given him a passion for justice and a passion for working with or serving people that were trapped in poverty. And so he gave up the job that he had selling, I don't know whether it was insurance or mortgages or something like that, and he started his own business, selling clothing and sourcing ethically traded clothing. He used the same business skills, he used the same gifts, but he set up a business selling those and ensuring that the profits were fairly distributed to the people that were largely living in poverty that were involved in making those clothes. It was using his gifts in a way that served his God-given passion. One last practical suggestion, and it's this. When you discover what gifts God's giving you, find someone else with the same gift and learn from them. When Jesus was training his disciples in preaching and healing and all that stuff, he basically took them with him to see everything he did. They lived with him 24/7, and he included them in everything he was doing. They watched him and they copied him. And then when he sent them out to start doing things for themselves, he would be seeing what they were doing and training them in that. They absorbed what Jesus did over years, actually, for most of them, of working alongside him. If you feel like God might want you to be a small group leader, find a small group leader and learn from them. If you feel like God might be giving you a gift of healing, find someone who prays for people to be healed and follow them around everywhere they go, day and night, 24/7, and see what they do. Ask them questions. Get them to show you. Maybe not 24/7, but you know what I mean. Get them to explain to you. Watch what they do, and then get them to watch you as you start to do it for yourself. Pester them. Do not let them say no, because it's part of being body together. And the flip side of that coin is if you've already got a role within this church, I mean any role at all, if you've got a role within this church, then who are you teaching right now? Are you actively looking for people to include and to mentor and to train and to draw into the team? If the answer's no, then I hope you are never planning to die or resign. Are you actively looking for people to draw into your team to work alongside you? Otherwise, you're storing up a future problem for the church. Jesus was an apprentice maker. That's what he did. He got people working alongside him and treated them as his apprentices. Let's be a church of apprentice makers and apprentices, because that's how the body stays alive. That's how the body thrives. God has made you gifted. If you don't feel that that's true, start asking him to show you where it's true. But sometimes it feels a bit like stepping out of the boat if you're going to discover and use those gifts. Please don't put limits on what gifts God can give you. And if you're not sure yet, give something a go. And if you are sure, give something else a go. And if you're really not sure, give everything a go. But find out where those gifts are. Find out where that passion is. Work out what you're passionate about. And find somebody to learn from. And if you're already doing, find somebody to teach. Because the body of Christ here at TBC isn't complete without you doing the bit that God's called you to do. Let's pray together, shall we? Lord, the thing that holds us back most of all, I think probably for all of us, is a bit of fear. Because we get afraid of looking daft. We get afraid that we might fail. We get afraid of what other people might think of us. And so, Lord, I want to ask you to deliver us from that fear. And Lord, I pray for each one of us that you would, if we're in the right place already, Lord, that you would reaffirm that you would confirm that to us. And if we're not sure, or if you're leading us into something new and different, would you show us where you're calling us to serve you, whether that's by doing the doing, whether that's by doing the praying, because both things are so, so important. But would you speak to us? And would you use this next bit of time as we spend time looking at boards and talking to one another and perhaps finding somebody to learn from? Lord, would you speak to each one of us? In Jesus' name, amen.